Yeah, so speaking of cancel culture, so John Cleese had got himself into a lot of hot cancel culture discourse as of recent, in the past kind of year or whatever. In essentially, people like a one. So I think one point, an episode of Faulty Towers got removed from a bunch of streaming services for containing the N word, which was only on some streaming services, but not on all of them, and it was only just the one episode. Whereas it wasn't Faulty Towers getting cancelled; it was it was a single individual episode of Faulty Towers that got removed from some streaming services. So Faulty Towers wasn't even cancelled, but John Cleese lost his fucking shit. He lost his mind. He's on the turf band. He's on the turf kind of bandwagon as well. So he's got a documentary coming out. I think was it for Channel 4 about the state of online discourse or something like that or whatever. I'm not gonna watch it, but maybe I should watch it on stream. Maybe that's a good thing to watch on stream. But anyway, regardless, he's gone to a lot of hot water. He's been railing against the woke snowflakes, just like everybody, every fucking, you know, washed up old comedian who's not done anything in fucking years and just trying desperate to cling to relevancy. But anyway, he's got this thing coming out. He's got an upcoming tour. I don't know, I think it's a book tour, maybe. I'm not sure. But regardless, he was on the BBC being interviewed. And he is complaining about it because he thinks the interview was somehow unfair. Let me find the interview. Mm-mm. I found this thing before I started the stream rather than having to search for it first of all. John Cleese complained of a BBC interview. Oh, I can watch it in full on this page. Perfect. So let's have a look at what he had to say in this particular interview.
Wonderful to have you on
Okay,
the program, John. I want to start by asking you,
nice to be here.
I know that you're particularly interested in talking about cancel culture. I think it's fair to say. I understand, in fact, you're making a documentary about it. What is it about cancel culture that interests you?
Well, it's a relatively new phenomenon, and of course, it affects comedians because
Right, okay, first of all, it is definitely not a new phenomenon in the fucking slightest. This was the guy who grew up during Mary Whitehouse. There's even a Monty Python skit about people who were offended by the things that Monty Python were doing in the 70s. There's even a skit that they did about that, where it's actually quite a funny one as well, where they're essentially some guy goes into a funeral parlor with his mother's body and they suggest eating her or something, and then they have a fake audience doing mock outrage in response to it, right? So he knows already that it's not a new phenomenon. It's been around for ages. The Dixie Chicks got cancelled for opposing the Iraq War. Magic the Gathering got cancelled because they were using satanic imagery. There's always been some kind of backlash to certain kind of cultural tropes and texts that's existed, and since there has been culture, there's been culture and backlash, and that's always happened. It is 100% not a new phenomenon, right? But it's just the people who have the voice now are people who are previous communities who previously had no voice because the internet is such an all-encompassing, uh, you know, um, forum for ideas, a forum for discussion that has given basically anybody who can get on the has access to the internet a voice, be able to speak that, whereas they previously wouldn't have done. So to say that it's a new thing is nonsense.
a lot of us do jokes that the cancel culture people, the woke people, don't think are right or don't think are correct. So I've been asked to do the program. So I've been exploring it. I've been reading quite a lot of books and trying to understand what it's all about. But it's quite a complex matter, and it seems to be boiling down to the fact that I think some people are rather overprotective. I mean, we all want parents to be protective, but we don't want them to be overprotective because that raises children who are not perhaps very well going to adapt to the real world. I think it's very
Yeah, that's very true, right? Because I turned out very poorly because my parents never exposed me to any racist jokes or any homophobia or transphobia when I was growing up. That never happened, and in many ways, I've never recovered from that lack of education growing up, and I've just grown up with such a soft skin from not being exposed to enough, transphobic arguments from people. Get a fucking grip, John. What a load of absolute fucking bullshit. Like you don't need to hear. You don't. Like just it's not gonna make you a more hardy and better person just because you listen to more like racist humor growing up. Get a fucking grip. Like, there are, I think we can all agree that there are basically, when it comes to free speech, these things like this, everyone agrees that there are limits. The discussion we're having is where those limits lie. And free speech, I will also remind people, is to do with what the government say you can and can't do. It's nothing to do with whether or not some venue won't book you because you're Roy Chubby Brown and literally all of your jokes are just laugh at the non-white people, right? Laugh at the women, laugh at the gender and sexual minorities. So that's and again, that's always been happening as well. People cancelled shows for people who they thought weren't, they thought were of who were too racy or too offensive or whatever. That's always been the case. Again, that's not a new phenomenon either. And it's not that we don't think that they're right or whatever. They think that we just kind of think we just people who are throwing their arms, the people who oppose certain things like this, the woke mob or whatever, the people who are doing the cancelling, they think that they're opposed to certain things for them not being right or not being good, rather than a consequentialist argument about the kind of behaviours that this is going to engender in society if we don't view them with a critical lens, right? If you just let people willy-nilly going around, doing a racism or whatever, and especially when it comes to something like comedy's always been a vector for, social attitudes. It's very rarely you have kind of, especially like famous comedy that isn't in any way at some point kind of culturally, politically, or socially motivated in the kind of commentary that it makes. It's all just TV dinner discourse, right? It's always had some kind of message or edge or specific point of view that it's trying to push with the comedy that's being done. That's always been the case. And the point of view is that if you have a society that is overall in general being permissive of things that could theoretically lead to overall societal harm by being normalized through comedy, that can make life materially worse for people in disenfranchised communities, right? I would agree, but I think in a lot of instances that goes too far, right? But at the end of the day, we need to at least have conversations about what we do and don't think is acceptable, and people should be able to challenge those who are saying things that do genuinely cause societal harm overall. For example, you have a look what happened with Dave Chappelle and the kind of people who are now going to get exposed to transphobic talking points because he doesn't do his fucking research. See what I mean?
Important that things should go wrong and that minor bad things should happen, because that helps people to learn to become a little bit tougher when they go out into the world, which is not a terribly friendly place a lot of the time. And if we overprotect them, then I think that doesn't work very well.
But John, some would say that what you're suggesting is that it's an
old... Why do you say but? Why do you say but?
Oh, it was just a turn of phrase.
Just explore what I'm saying.
Yes, yeah. That's precisely what I'm...
Whoa, imagine getting fucking triggered by the word but. Right? She's not saying us. She's just making a conversational point, right? She's interviewing you, and so she is asking you to make a clarification on a statement that you're making with some kind of alternative hypothesis, right? This is literally the fucking Ben Shapiro interview. Or at least I'm assuming it's going to be. I've not watched it yet. The idea that someone challenged on it was like, oh, whoa, I'm on here to be able to extol my virtues as an orator, not to be challenged on my viewpoints. Whoa there. But, this is the BBC, right? You've got to expect at least some pushback to be able to clarify and solidify the viewpoints that you hold. It's just going to be Ben Shapiro all over again.
That's precisely what I'm about to do, if you would give me the opportunity to do that. I want to ask you, there are people out there who, having heard your views, would consider them to be old-fashioned and not taking into consideration the feelings of people who have been hurt by some of these comments. And I want to give you the example, for instance, in Britain, where racist behaviour, for instance, was couched as a bit of banter. Is that acceptable, in your view, as a joke?
I think it's a very poor question.
I'd like you to answer it.
It's literally the Ben Shapiro debate. It's literally Ben Shapiro versus Andrew Neil, except even more softball than Andrew Neil. So like, I don't agree with the way in which you phrase this question. It's literally he's literally being Ben Shapiro right now.
Well, it's hard because it's so scattered and it has so many different ideas in it, and I don't know which place to start with to answer it. What I've said is the important thing is that people are protected to the...
Like, I know that you're old, John. I know that your brain is just kind of turned into goo at this point, but you can at least understand that the point that she was trying to make there was, maybe we should at least have some kind of consideration to the effect of the words that you say. That's literally all that she was saying.
Right degree, not overprotected and not underprotected. So the question becomes, what is the right degree? Now, the practitioners of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a very successful therapy, which is used a lot to treat depression and anxiety in young people, say that the woke ideas are pretty much the opposite of what they use to make people less depressed and anxious. Now, it doesn't matter whether that's old-fashioned or new-fashioned or even from the early 12th.
I mean, he's not even explaining I'm assuming what he's talking here is about trigger warnings or whatever. But that's nothing to do with depression and anxiety. Trigger warnings has to do with PTSD, right? It's just as I was talking about on stream before, it's literally the analog to the viewer discretion is advised thing we used to get on TV shows. So, like, and again, I don't even think that I think the efficacy of CBT is disputed. Not that CBT, to which the efficacy is incredibly high. The other CBT is very, very high. Getting people to pass their motorcycle tests. But yeah, like, the fact that he's kind of honing in on something as like innocuous as trigger warnings rather than the actual point was, we all know this is mostly in the context of kind of cultural texts and cultural tropes and things like that. We're not really talking about trigger warnings with this debate, because I think that's, and again, even then, trigger warnings and content warnings was kind of something, of like 3 years ago. It's not really the same discourse that it is now, to be honest.
Century. That is a very interesting idea and needs to be explored without using these emotional terms like people being hurt and all this kind of thing. Let's try to be a little bit more calm about it and use less emotionally loaded words.
Well, what if I went on TV, John, and said I wanted to redact you in Minecraft, right? Would you be hurt by that, wouldn't you? You'd be hurt. Like, I would say, well, I'm not going to do it, but that's something that I would enjoy doing. I would enjoy redacting you in Minecraft. But you'd be hurt by those feelings, wouldn't you? So that would be bad of me to say. There's no positive utility in me me expressing those things. Why should I say it when I know all that's going to do is, hurt your feelings? Because that's kind of what I want to do. By making that statement, or what would be the purpose of making that statement if it's something I genuinely intend on doing, right? So, again, there's always like the line of which we take, not only personal offense, but an overall societal effect into question when we look at the kind of things that we feel people should be more moderate regarding. But we've always done that, and that's always been some level of social contract that governs that as well.
Are you saying that people
Now, I think you were going to ask me, are you going to ask me about being here in Singapore to do shows and in Bangkok, or is that at the back of your agenda?
No, we certainly did ask you about that, John. Why have you chosen Asia as a place to do these comedy shows, particularly when we're in the middle of a pandemic?
Well, it's very hard to plan at the moment, as you might have noticed. I don't know. You probably realize that sometimes a new variant comes along at very short notice and causes a great deal of disturbance very, very quickly. So these shows were arranged some time ago when there was a good chance that the Delta variant was coming under control. Then the Omicron one came up about 3 weeks ago, which of course changed it all. But our plans have been set way before that. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, indeed, it does. Have you had to change your routine at all because of the pandemic, or make adjustments to it?
No, I haven't started to write it yet because I don't do it for 3 weeks. And I have a great deal of material that I've sort of accumulated over the past 15 years. The first time I started doing this kind of show was 2006. So I'm going to choose the material that I think is right. But I've been asked to base it on a talk that I have, which is about why there is no hope. The main central point of which is the fact that one of the great problems these days is that everyone wants to be right and nobody really wants to listen to other people's opinions.
Are you in that?
Well, as long as people's opinions, are based on rational, some kind of like level of rationality, and I guess myself personally, like some argument made upon the overall marginal utility of the actions people are doing, right? I guess that's my only personal moral philosophy that I'm talking about here, but like, don't listen to other people's opinions. Well, people are gonna hear people's opinions regardless. There's so many, the public square is so wide, is so wide, and at the end of the day, like especially online, kind of TOS is incredibly vague and really not particularly it's not particularly heavy-handed in the way that it deals with TOS. You can say quite a lot of shit on the Bird app and not get your tweets deleted. Anything other than that is just people disagreeing with you. Like you don't really care about people, everyone hearing each other's opinions. All you really care about is people hearing your opinion. In this case, that's what that's what this whole thing belies in essence, really.
That sense, if you could elaborate a little bit more about what that means when you think that people are not listening to each other, is that your sense of what is happening?
Yes, very much so. I mean, the historians used to say about the English that we had a great ability to compromise, and that was why we were quite successful. I don't see much sign of that now. I just see a lot of groups on either side absolutely convinced that they're right, without really being interested in trying to look at the facts and the theories that are involved in these kind of decisions. And if you look at American,
Literally, like half the time, it's like I do get that there are definitely a bunch of people who don't even look at the facts before forming their opinions. I'll give you a fucking like clue. Mostly people on the right. It's mostly people on the right who don't look at any of the facts or figures with regards to these issues. Who would have fucking thought it?
now, and it's highly polarized society, you realize that people really aren't listening to each other at all, because the Trump supporters watch Fox News and get one version of the news, and other people watch other channels and get a different version of the news. They both think that the version they're getting is right, which is naive.
John, I want to ask you about your thoughts.
I mean, that is a good point, to be fair. It's literally, he's making an argument of manufactured consent here by saying that the reason why we have such a polarized society, and it's very true, is because it's specifically kind of sculpted by media narratives that want to paint people as being part of opposing groups rather than, a general, population wanting to create a cohesive society, right? Because that generates clicks. Having culture wars, having these like binary conflicts between groups of society, wanting people to kind of pin their flag to some kind of particular movement they have to be a part of to oppose something else. It is specifically used as a marketing strategy for these media corporations, not just to create our own personal brand and to create a recurring audience and to manufacture that consent in that way, but it's also done to be able to distract people from lots of the times like economic issues that are going to be in the benefit of the vast majority of the population and create a more cohesive society. If we do spend too much time getting distracted by cultural bullshit like this, which you're contributing to right now, John, you're contributing to it by getting angry about people being too woke, because that's like without actually properly defining what you mean by that, rather than using it as a obfuscatory term so that you don't actually have to engage with people on the actual positions that they hold.
On another comedian. I don't know if you know this American comedian, Dave Chappelle, who faced a huge backlash for his comments.
We're back on cancel culture. Yes, I thought we were going to be talking about shows and comedy, but I'm not interested in doing this interview anymore. So I'll leave you now. Bye-bye.
Okay, that's your...
I mean, he was... Yeah, Dave Chappelle is a comedian. That was it. You said, oh, I thought we can have a discussion about comedy. Yes, Dave Chappelle is a comedian who's in a very similar situation to you. How is that not a discussion about comedy, John? Also, amusingly, the Ben Shapiro through line is continuing with the just like, this interview's over, I'm fucking leaving because you're asking too many hard questions. I'm too much of a snowflake to actually give my opinion on these issues, right? Or I didn't sign up to being asked questions that I might have to struggle to answer. I thought I was here just to use it as a promotional strategy for my upcoming comedy tour of Singapore. BBC not giving me the platform I want to be able to continuously market myself to the population, rather than using it as a critical platform to discuss issues, which is you said that you wanted to do. You said you wanted to have a discussion of the issues in this fucking interview. Someone's coming up with questions about the discussions of, that you say you want to happen, and then as soon as it does happen, you fucking walk away. It's so hypocritical. Like, I hate appealing to hypocrisy, but it's just wild. They literally spend the entire interview saying, "We need to have a discussion about these issues." Oh, okay, well, what about it now? Do you have a discussion now? No, actually, I would rather just promote my tour, thank you. You can have a discussion on the Bird app or whatever. What a fucking nightmare these people are. Interested to see her reaction.
Prerogative.
He doesn't even close the Zoom meeting either. He just takes out his headphones and walks away. Oh dear lord, oh dear lord. And apparently now, he is going to complain to the BBC. He intends to put a formal complaint about the deception, dishonesty, and tone. Like, first of all, the tone was incredibly thin. It was so softball. It wasn't like it was like the one way it's not similar to the Andrew Neil Ben Shapiro debate discussion or whatever is that Andrew Neil was incredibly incisive with the question that he was asking, whereas this person, who conducted this particular interview, asked incredibly softball questions that were very easy for him to answer. But because he was, he didn't want to have to be able to answer difficult questions, be able to stake his claim to a position, he just gets up and walked away like a fucking coward. Jesus Christ. Da-da-da-da. Journalist Karishma Vaswani had tried to portray him as old-fashioned, uncaring, and basically harmful. That's the problem. Like, as soon as these people get challenged, they then just take up the position that they think other people hold on these issues, right? It's like, well, you're trying to put me into a specific position. All you're doing is asking clarifying questions from an alternate perspective to get him to solidify his viewpoint. Like, I don't know how it's just wild to me. It's absolutely wild. He said he was in the interview to discuss his stand-up shows in Singapore and Bangkok, but instead had been asked about why he was interested in cancel culture. Well, he's got a fucking program coming up about it. And literally, it's just this kind of fluffy idea about parents being overprotective. Like, there's a really great point in the first ContraPoints video about cancel, about the left quote unquote silencing free speech or whatever, that I kind of touched upon beforehand. This idea that people from marginalized communities, they just don't know that racism and transphobia and homophobia exist, and they're just completely shielded from it by a culture that's not permissive of people being edgy enough, when it's literally fucking everywhere. We just don't want, for example, I don't know, the money that we spend on tuition fees going to pay these people speakers fees, or it coming to our certain area of the country and bringing a certain kind of caliber of individual and spreading a certain message amongst the area of society that we live in, right? Like, I wouldn't say that we should just ban Roy Chubby Brown from speaking anywhere, but if a certain venue doesn't want to host him because of the shitty things he says, then that's their fucking prerogative at the end of the day. They're a private company, do what they fucking want. Like, very, very simple. Karishma had no interest in discussion with me. She wanted only the role of prosecutor. But previously needs to train her again, which is literally, again, look, Ben Shapiro back all over again. Just talking about, well, clearly you're a leftist who's just trying to skewer me with your manufactured talking points when she was just asking clarifying questions. This is a fair and appropriate interview which touched on the topics that John Cleese had been previously vocal about, as well as themes within his new tour. Is his new? I mean, if his new tour is about it as well, like if he's literally going on a tour about the questions he was being asked, then how is that in any way not the interview that he would have signed up for? Cleese blacklists himself from university, so fucking. So it was the Germans episode that was put for racial slurs, but at least that clarifies it. But yeah, no, what a fucking snowflake! What a fucking thin-skinned individual who can't even carry himself through the mildest of questioning, and clarifying the clarification around some of the views that he holds, which I find very, very amusing. But hey ho, that's the world we're living in, where these people just get to spout their uninformed gibberish just because they happen to be famous once in a previous life or whatever, and now they feel like they have this kind of divine right to a platform with which to opine on issues of the day, when so they don't really understand or take any kind of proper nuanced discussion of with regards to these things or whatever. I mean, I don't doubt that actually, to be fair, he probably does have some nuanced opinions on these things, but we can't know what they are if you refuse to fucking answer questions on them. Unless you're just given, free space in some kind of, fucking rag to moan about it without any kind of pushback. If you want there to be a robust debate in the public discourse for people to be able to, discuss these issues from both sides of the equation, then you're going to have to deal with people who, when they're interviewing you, ask you questions that aren't that are at least somewhat difficult, which these ones weren't even that difficult regardless either. So incredibly snowflakey, incredibly fucking like lowest common denominator from him here. When if he's going to talk about the silencing of discourse, you can at least do the decency of engaging in the discourse himself rather than running away when the questions get too difficult. But hey ho, it is what it is.